Hello. My name is Teralyn, and I'm the public education specialist here at Citrus County Mosquito Control. And this is going to be the third installment of our beekeeping or beginner beekeeping webinar series that we're posting here to YouTube. So this presentation is going to be an introduction about pests and diseases that you may encounter when you are new to beekeeping, some common ones that just pop up in beehives and are things to be aware of. But I'm going to give the same disclaimer that we always give, and that is that this is not an exhaustive presentation. You're not going to get everything you need to know out of this presentation about pests and diseases, but it's a great foundation. So definitely take your knowledge that you learn here in this video and, build upon it with other trainings and, work with a mentor and try to see these things for yourselves and be able to spot them because once you see them for the first time, they're pretty easy to spot. Okay, so our schedule for this video is we're going to talk about all things what drives colony decline. So we're going to talk more specifically about nutrition and how that can contribute to colony decline. Queen issues, those are huge. If you have a problem with your queen, then you're going to have issues with the rest of your hive. Pests, so some common ones, the top ones are hive beetles, wax moths, and varroa mites. And then we'll talk about some of the diseases that they can get as a hive and then helpful resources again at the end as usual. So when we're going through our hives, when we're doing an inspection, we want to see frames full of bees, full of resources. So on here, it looks like we've got some capped brood. Up here, there might be some capped honey and can't really see because it's blurry. But this is great. This is what we want to see. We want to see a busy hive, busy bees. This is not what we want to see. So there's a lot of empty space here. There's nothing in the cells, no nectar, no pollen, so they haven't been collecting resources, and so that's a major red flag. And then, there's not that many bees covering the frames, so that's another red flag. Their population is not really high enough for all of these frames to be in their hive. So, if you see something like this and there's not a whole lot of bees and um, you might want to remove them because this is too much empty space. You want to just have frames in there that the bees can cover and guard and take care of and fill resources in. You don't want a bunch of empty space because that will attract pests and that will make pest issues worse if the bees cannot defend adequately, certain frames. So if you see this, just remove them. But again, everything has to be taken into consideration. Just because you see this doesn't mean it has to be removed. That's just if there's an overabundance of space. But if this is on the edge frames of your hives and the middle is very full, like 90% full, and these are the only ones that are empty, leave them because they'll probably expand to that space eventually. Um, but yeah. So, as a beekeeper, when you're going through your hive, you see something like that, you see some red flags, you might think, what's wrong with my hive? And there are several things that could be wrong. And, one of these things might not be so bad on its own, but when they all come together and cause compounding effects, that's when it can really, really hurt your colony. So the first thing you should look at when, you're maybe seeing something that's off is how's their nutrition. So if going back to this frame, if you're not seeing any stores, they're not collecting nectar, they're not collecting pollen, then you need to supplement those things. So they're not finding them naturally in the environment and you need to provide them. And so we've talked about nutritional supplements before, I think in the last video. So I won't go too into detail, but over here on the left, that's a pollen patty. And that is what you're going to supplement, if they're not having a lot of pollen in their hives and collecting a lot of that from the environment, you want to go ahead and supplement it. And then over here, that's sugar water. So that we've got an entrance feeder right here. We just stick that right in the entrance, stick a mason jar full of sugar water on there, and then that is their carbohydrate source supplement. So they need sufficient amounts of these resources to be able to survive and carry on their colony function. So during times of a dearth, it's, you have to provide it. So sugar water that is in a 1-to-1 ratio that's pictured here at the top, that is great for comb building. So 1 part sugar here at the bottom and then 1 part water at the top, half and half. Just regular white sugar from the store is fine. That's going to stimulate them to build comb and wax. And so that's great if you're wanting them to build out your boxes, if it's like spring and summer and you're wanting them to create new comb to store honey in, especially. And then this 2-to-1 ratio down here, so 2 part sugar, 1 part water, stimulates them to store the sugar water in the comb. So if it's like winter like it is right now and you're seeing that they have low honey stores, feed this 2-to-1 ratio and that will stimulate them to store that away and cap it as honey, and then have that to eat later. So you want to feed when they look low. Stop feeding though if they don't eat it within a few days. So usually when we stick our feeder jars on, they drink it down within like a couple of hours. But if you go back out the next day and it's still there, and then the next day it's still there, definitely take it off because that's going to attract pests. One, and two, they don't want it. So if they did want it, they would have drank it faster. So just take it off and they don't need it. But check often because they can starve quickly. So if you go out, say, 1 week and then 2 weeks later, check again, make sure that they just still have resources because they can starve very quickly. Pollen is a little different though with timing, so you want to feed that more in the beginning of the season, like spring, summer, when brood rearing is really ramping up and they're, wanting to swarm and reproduce and go out and have their drones mate with other queens. Like that's a huge, spring and summer is a huge time for brood rearing. So if it's winter and they're not brood rearing and they're kind of going dormant for the winter time, remove the or don't worry about feeding a pollen patty because they're not going to be using it up as much. And then remove it if they don't eat it all. Like, so in the spring and summer, if you put it in there and they don't eat it within a couple of days, take that off because that will attract pests, especially wax moths. We left a pollen patty in one time and our hive just got swarmed with wax moths. And it was really disgusting. So, definitely remove that after a couple of days if they don't eat it. Okay, so nutrition could be an issue, but if you're like, oh, their nutrition is good, next step is make sure that you're on top of your pest monitoring. So varroa mites, you should be monitoring for those monthly, doing those alcohol washes or sugar shakes. So up here at the top, we've got a varroa mite pictured here, and this is a honeybee. Um, Looks like a pupa. So they are attaching to that honey, that developing honeybee and feeding actually on their fat body, which I think is the equivalent of our like liver. So they're feeding on that and they are like a parasite. They're just hanging on and feeding from the honeybee. And in return, they do transmit viruses that the honeybees can contract and get really sick. So I think I mentioned some of those later, but that is a huge issue with varroa mites. That's why they're so deadly to our colonies and why we monitor for them monthly. Their life cycles are quick. They can, you could have no varroa mites 1 month and then come back and have like such a high mite load the next month that you have to treat immediately, or you're going to lose your hive. They will kill your hives. So varroa mites are super, super important. Make sure you are on top of your varroa mite levels and doing those checks. Hive beetles, I don't have a picture of. Oh, I go into more detail on the other sides. Okay, so I will just give a quick overview of these. So we'll talk about hive beetles, wax moths, minor pests, things like rodents, roaches, ants, robber flies, wasps, spiders, things like that. Okay, so I kind of already said all this, but they are an invasive pest. And the reason that they're so invasive is because they co-evolved. So they naturally evolved with the Asian honeybee Apis cerana. Now, if you recall back to our first presentation in this series, the Western honeybee that we manage is the Apis mellifera. So when the mites traveled over, and now they're on every continent in the world except for Antarctica, they came over, and the Western honeybee, because they had not co-evolved with the varroa mite, they are, not adapted to dealing with them. So the Asian honeybee, not a problem. They Varroa mite colonies are not, or varroa mites are not really an issue in their colonies. They're just like a pest that they just have to deal with, but they know how to deal with them. But for us, it's like it decimates colonies because our bees just don't know how to deal with them. So that's a quick, why they're so invasive. So monitoring is really key. Prevention, I feel like, is futile, which means it's not really feasible. That you could get honeybees and not have them for a while, but you're going to get them eventually. Like, I feel like it's something that every beekeeper has to deal with at some point. And you're going to have to treat or intervene when those mite levels are above treatment thresholds. So, again, getting them out of your hive completely once you have them is probably never going to happen. I don't know, probably it might. Maybe I'm making crazy claims here, but I think a lot of beekeepers just have to maintain a tolerable level of varroa mites. That way they're not hurting their colonies too bad and like killing them. And then you monitor so they don't get out of control. But there's going to be mites in there. There's going to be some level of mite load in your hives. And so you want to, obviously you can't treat them over and over with a miticide, because that could hurt your bees and it's just not feasible. So that's why there are treatment thresholds that they have determined at these universities where that level of varroa mite load is not going to be harmful to your honeybees versus the threshold that if they cross that, they will be super harmful to your colonies. So I'll share resources at the end, some websites that will go over what those treatment thresholds are, and that way you can learn a little bit more about the specifics. Moving on to hive beetles. Sorry, I just want to make sure that I had those veromite treatment slides in here. Okay, so moving on to hive beetles, they're more of like a nuisance pest versus the veromites, which is more of like a deadly pest. But we want to monitor and use interventions when we can. That way, we keep populations low. I mean, again, there's gonna just be hive beetles here and there in your colony, but as long as they're not out of control, it's not gonna hurt the bees too bad. But the adults can hide in comb and crevices, and so that's why we say don't give them too much empty space. Otherwise, it's just going to be a hive beetle factory in there. So larval infestations can cause slimy frames, and that's what's pictured down here at the bottom. And the bees will not clean this up and reuse this. They think this is gross, it stinks, it's nasty, and they don't want nothing to do with that. So the larvae will look similar to wax moths. So it might be once you see the worms, you might be like, oh, is it wax moths or is it hive beetles? But if you see this slime, that's definitely hive beetles. And again, strong colonies can, really fight these things, and weak colonies cannot. So, this is the type of pest where if you've already got a weak colony, either from nutritional problems or queen issues, if they're queenless, then they might have more of an issue with hive beetles. But if you've got a good, strong colony, they're going to be okay. And that is really the key to all of these issues that we're going to be talking about today is if you have a strong queen, if you have a strong hive, you've got lots of bees, they're collecting lots of resources, they're really, really strong, you're going to have less problems with pests and diseases. It's when these things, break them down and, they're not doing so well, either from nutrition or other things, and then these other pests come in, that's when they can really have an effect. So here are some of those pest monitoring tools, and I think I covered this in the last presentation too, more in detail. But this is several ways that we can control varroa mites, or not control, but monitor for them. So we've got an alcohol wash over here. We take a sample of about 300 bees from the hive, put them in a jar of alcohol, shake that out in the sink, and then in our sieve we can see how many mites we have versus the amount of honeybees, and that's how we can get our treatment threshold. So 3 mites per 100 bees is the recommended, threshold, and above that, you would want to definitely do some sort of miticide treatment. And then here in the middle, we've got hive beetle traps. So these are relatively cheap. You can get these on Amazon. You put apple cider vinegar in the middle to kind of attract the beetles, and then mineral oil here on the edges. The beetles are gonna fall in that and die. So that they're pretty cheap. And simple to use. You just stick two of these in a box, one on this side, one on this side, and come back your next inspection, dump out the dead beetles, refill it, put it back in. And it doesn't hurt the bees, and it's an effective tool. You can also there's like pesticides for hive beetles. We've never used any. Our hive beetle situation has never been that bad enough to have to do that. But that is an option that exists. And then there are three mite monitoring methods that you can use with this same tool here, this Varroa Easy Check. So you can do an alcohol wash, a sugar shake, or a CO2 injection. We've never done the CO2 injection or the sugar roll, so I can't speak too much on those, but we have used this for an alcohol wash, and it is really helpful out in the field to just be able to see the mites right there and then. Okay, so integrated pest management is key. So that is where you attack the pests from all different angles and don't just rely on a miticide. So when using the varroa mite as an example, you want to, make sure you're monitoring for the pest and preventing them as best as possible. Get entrance reducers and drone comb. That way, the they sell certain frames that the queen will lay just drones in, and drones are bigger cells than worker cells, so they are going to the varroa mite will breed within those cells, and more of them can actually come out of a drone cell. So because it's larger. So if you put a frame of drone comb in your hive and take it out once it's full of drones before they hatch out, freeze it, and then yes, you lose all those bees, but you also kill a bunch of mites. And so that's a really good way to control them without having to use a pesticide product. There's also cultural controls, so caging your queen, keeping her from laying eggs, give your entire hive a brood break, so no eggs, no hatching brood. And because the varroa mite develops under those cells with the developing brood, therefore there's nowhere for them to reproduce and live, so you get rid of mites that way. And then there's different synthetic and natural treatments that you can use as well. And again, I'll leave resources at the end. There's a website where you can go on and they have a tool that you can see all the different treatment options, and they can tell you which one might work best for your program and with the time of year that it is, and if you want to be organic or not. So that can be a really helpful tool when you're looking for a pesticide treatment. But anytime you're using pesticides, make sure you wear your personal protective equipment, right? So definitely read the label and see what these different products require from you as the applicator, because you don't want to be applying anything and have it get on your skin or get in your eyes and or breathe it in and get hurt. Okay, so moving on to wax moths. So these, like the hive beetles, are like a secondary pest. So they are attracted to the smell of comb, and they will actually be attracted to even stored comb. If you have stored comb somewhere in storage, they smell that, they will infest it. So again, strong hives can fight these off. They don't have as much of an issue, but weak hives that are already broken down due to other issues can really take a hard hit from wax moths. So this is their larvae pictured down here, and they cause webbing. So unlike the hive beetles that are slimy, they cause like a webbing and or like a silk. And bees can clean this up, but it's really gross. Like it's probably not their favorite thing to do because it really gets down in the comb because the larvae will like burrow through the comb, and so it can be really messy and gross. but you want to freeze the comb to kill the eggs. Eggs and larvae can get into those cracks and crevices, and the cocoons actually will damage your hive equipment too. So we've got a few frames that got um, from, our huge wax moth problem that we had actually has indents in the frame because of the cocoons. So we want to store our comb just for prevention purposes in cool, dry areas. Wrap them with cellophane. That's what we do. Put them in an airtight container somewhere that they cannot get into because prevention is really key. Once you have them, it can be really difficult and really messy to get rid of them. So moving on to more incidental pests, so ones that don't really affect your hives too much, but might be unpleasant for you as the manager of the hives to have to deal with. So they just are come into the hives for warmth, or they smell resources, or they want the darkness. They're pretty easy to mechanically control. So, um, any mice or rodents, if you have a problem with those in your area, you might want to get a metal hive entrance reducer. So that's what's pictured here, and then that can help prevent, any rodents from getting in there. Tanglefoot for ants is great. It's this sticky stuff, and we put it at the bottom of our hive stands. That way, ants, when they crawl up, they get caught in it and they can't make it up into our hives. So I recommend either the paste or the spray. It is very sticky, though. I will link it in the description below, both options. But it's really great. We have not had any problems with ants since we started using that. And then roaches and spiders too. You just have to shoo them away. Like sometimes, like when you pop open the lids to the hives, there might be a roach in there or a spider, but they're just trying to hide and get away from the elements. Maybe it rained, and they're just trying to get to a cool, dry place. So we usually just shoo those away, but they're not going to hurt your bees at all. So then robber flies, wasp, spiders, so they will either hunt or like eat the bees. I've got this green lynx spider pictured here. It was actually posted up in front of our hives like for a few months last year. I don't know what eventually happened to her. I think she laid babies and maybe died. But she like every day we would go out and we would see her just in her web. And one day we went out and she actually had a honeybee in her web. And so that was a really cool photo opportunity for me as an entomologist. The beekeeper in me was a little sad about it, but it's just one bee, and it's the circle of life, right? So, again, they're not going to be eating enough of them to really hurt your hive at all. So, um, those I kind of just let live and go on their merry way. Um, Bears, though, they will want the protein and the larvae and the developing brood, and they will actually destroy hives, and they'll come back again and again if they find a food source. So if you know you have bears in your area and that's an issue, you might want to install some sort of bear fencing, because once they find your hives, even bear fencing won't really keep them away. So preventing the bears is a huge one if you have them in your area. Okay, so going into some of the varroa mite diseases that they can transmit. So these are things that you might just want to look for when you're out inspecting your bees. In the 4 years we've been beekeeping, I've not really seen any of these. I really don't think I've seen any of these. So, I mean, that maybe they're not that common. But at first, when I was becoming a beekeeper and like learning about these things, I thought they were very prevalent and that I was going to have to constantly be on guard for these different diseases. But um, they have not been an issue for us anyway. But some of the varroa transmitted viruses are K-wing virus. So it actually makes their wings sit in like a letter K position. And that's, a concern if you see that. You might have a high varroa population. There's also deformed wing virus. So if a bunch of your bees are hatching out and their wings are all shriveled up, that's a problem. Obviously, they can't forage for resources. If their wings look like that, they're probably not going to live for very long. So that is another sign that you might have a high varroa level. And then brood diseases. So there's different fungal, bacterial diseases. But European foulbrood and American foulbrood are very serious, especially American foulbrood. Chalk brood, these are just brood diseases. So if you look in those cells and you're looking at your larvae and they look dried up or nasty or stinky or black when they should be white. Yeah, there could be some sort of issue or sickness spreading through your brood. Um, there's something called nosema. Some tracheal mites have been an issue in the past. These are all things that you can do more research on, watch more videos on. The Honeybee Health Coalition too has, which I'll link at the end and below. Um, they've got some great, fact sheets about these diseases, and you can learn more. But this is another, like, if you see any of these or you think you have a foul brood, or that is something that you want to contact your apiary inspector about. It's their job to make sure that these viruses are not spreading in Florida, and so, they're gonna be way better at identifying the problems and providing a solution than me or another beekeeper. Okay, so if you're good on nutrition, you don't have any pests, you don't have any diseases, could be a queen issue. So her age is a huge factor in how she performs, whether she mated properly or not. If she didn't fully get mated and she doesn't have enough sperm stored to continue laying eggs, she might cease her egg laying, which can obviously lead to colony decline because there's no new bees hatching out. So if you see any damage to her, you see that her brood pattern is not good anymore, if she's not laying a bunch of eggs, or if you see queen cells in the colony, could all be signs that your queen is failing and that the bees are trying to replace her, or that maybe she's gone, or maybe she died, something happened to her, she got squished when you were doing a hive inspection. These are all issues that they have with their queen, and maybe she needs to be requeened, maybe you need to get a new queen, or maybe you just need a queen in general because your queen is gone. So these issues can wreak havoc on a hive. And then of course there's other colony issues too. So um, these are all things that when they come together, or when two or three of these things come together, they can really negatively affect your hive. So competition and robbing. So stronger hives will actually rob resources from weaker hives. And so that can hurt a colony, especially if they're already struggling. Aggression and Africanization. So, if your bees are super aggressive, or if they might have some Africanized genes, then they might be really hard for you to inspect and be able to see if there's these issues in the hive, because you're just getting stung the whole time and it's unpleasant for you to do an inspection. So that can, make colony decline happen faster if you're not able to intervene when you need to as a beekeeper because you're getting stung too much. Weather, so the rain, the wind, the cold, all those things can affect the optimization of honeybee foraging. So they are very picky. They don't like to go out and leave the hive and forage if it's too cold, or if it's too windy, or if there's any rain. They really hunker down during these weather events. So, if it's been rainy or windy or cold in your area recently, they might not have been foraging, and so that could contribute to them having lower resources. They are a lot of times just weak in the fall. They really ramp up production in the spring and summer, and then fall comes and maybe there's a nectar dearth or a pollen dearth, and they're weak. They don't do as well for some reason. So definitely in the fall and winter, make sure you're on top of everything, the mite checks and the nutrition, just to help them get through those periods that might be a little bit rougher for them. A lot of times they have overwintering issues. So if they're not strong going into the fall and winter, they could have problems getting through the winter at all. Also another thing, making splits. We talked about splits in previous videos. So when you split your colony, they might not have been ready, and or maybe you didn't do it very well, and you didn't leave them enough resources. So they making splits when they're not ready or making splits improperly could contribute to your colony not be doing so well. And then location issues. So are they near resources? Are you near a flower bed or a garden or somewhere where they're not going to have very many resources? So if you're not, then you need to supplement those things. But if they're near resources, that will definitely help them do better. And then I wanted to throw this slide in here as well, just because we are mosquito control and we do have bees and we do get questions about our product's effects on bees and pollinators. So we have had our bees on our property for 3 years, going on four now. So we got them in 2022. So we're going on our fourth year now. And we test all of our equipment on site. We calibrate um, all of our equipment on site with our products that we use. So they are in contact with the products that we use. We're on the same property, and they're still doing great. So all of our technicians are also trained on label rates for our pesticide products and proper applications to reduce any exposure to things like honeybees, butterflies, moths. And so the spraying that we do is actually performed at night, most of it. And when bees are not foraging and they're hunkered down in their hives for the night, so they're not going out, getting into contact with the spray, they're not visiting flowers and getting any spray that could be deposited on the plants. And a lot of what we do, which I can give a whole separate presentation and post it on YouTube about our mosquito control practices. In fact, I will do that. So they will. So we actually go out and we larvicide. We work mostly during the daytime. So we try to get the mosquitoes while they're larvae. And the products that we use to do that are specific bacteria that are specific to mosquito larvae, and they're not going to hurt anything else that comes into contact with it. So the spray that we use is a last resort, and we do what we can to do what we have to do to kill the mosquitoes, but also preserve pollinators. So, yeah, beekeepers too, if you have bees, you can call us, let us know, and we can actually put that in our system at your address and everything. That way, when we go out, we can be aware that there's hives in the area and determine how best we can approach that situation and be mindful of them when we're out there. But our spray is the size of the droplets, very specifically calibrated just to target mosquitoes. So if it comes into contact with a larger insect, it'll take a lot more of the product to kill it than it would a mosquito. There's another great talk on our YouTube that I will link as well that goes over this of Florida professor, Dr. Philip Kaler. He actually came to our district and allowed us to film the video of his presentation and put it on our YouTube. And he gives a great talk about the um, toxicity of our pesticides that we use to both bees and mosquitoes. And he kind of debunks some of the fake science that's out there and backs it up with some real research. So that's a really great talk that I recommend checking out. Also, our treatments, the sprays break down very rapidly and they don't have a residual in the environment, so they're not going to stick around and be a problem when the bees come out of their hive. And most of the pesticide kills that you hear about with bees are linked to improper use by other sectors, other pesticide applicators, or even beekeeping products themselves. So I've done it myself. I've, used a product in the beehives before that I missed a part on the label when I was reading that said to take the entrance reducers off. And so it ended up killing a bunch of bees in all of our hives. And so that was a terrible learning lesson for me, but sometimes even being a beekeeper, trying to be, the best beekeeper and savor of the bees as you can, sometimes you can even make mistakes and, accidentally kill your bees too. So just something to put out there. And then we actually do have some new emerging threats, unfortunately, that are on the horizon. So there's a new invasive mite that's traveling the world, and hopefully it doesn't make it into Florida. But apparently it's worse than the varroa mite. So that would be terrible if it got here. So we're trying to prevent that as much as possible from getting into the US. There's also invasive hornets that have made it here in the US. I don't believe they're in Florida, but they're in other parts of the US. And then miticide resistance is a huge problem. So we've only got a couple different insecticides that we can use to treat for varroa mites. So, once the mites become resistant to those, we don't have a whole lot of other options. So that slow pesticide development process kind of works against us, and that new products are not being rapidly developed, right? So, that's a concern. So we want to make sure whenever we're doing any sort of miticide treatments or any pesticide treatments that we're rotating our products and not using the same treatment over and over again. That way we can fight that insecticide resistance. Also, queens are not lasting as long as they used to. They don't really know why. So that's, something unfortunate that we have to deal with. And then, of course, uneducated beekeepers. So, people who get into it and they don't know everything that it involves, and then they end up killing their bees or, having to get rid of their bees because they can't handle it. So that can actually hurt more than it helps. So to wrap it up, I've got some helpful resources here. I'm gonna say it again, like I did in all the other videos, get a mentor, get with the Citrus County Beekeepers or the Nature Coast Beekeepers, our local beekeeping groups here in Citrus County. Check out UFIPSB College. They have great college level course classes on honeybees, everything from how to start a honey operation to the biology of queen bees. And they've got really great classes. So definitely check them out. The Master Beekeeper program is also really great if you're wanting to do more school behind your beekeeping practice and have that certification. I recommend getting involved in that. I'm almost a Master Beekeeper. I have like one step left before I can finish the program. So hopefully I will be finishing that soon. But the Honeybee Lab at UF has a YouTube channel that I'll link down below to check out their videos. They're really great. Um, and then you become friends with your apiary inspector. Again, if there's any pests or diseases in your hive, they're going to be your first line of contact. And then check out the University of Florida Extension Office. They every spring have a beekeeping for beginners course. I don't think they're having it this spring because Steve, the person who was, managing this program, he is unfortunately retiring. So he will not be doing the program anymore. And I don't know who is going to take it over or if they're even going to continue it. But if they do, they're going to post about it probably on Facebook or in the Chronicle, and share that. And I will certainly share that on our Facebook as well. But just look out maybe in 2027, they could have this workshop again, and it's a really great one to get involved with if you're interested in starting beekeeping. Okay, and here are my acknowledgements. So I get like all of my information from the University of Florida Honeybee Research and Extension Lab. So that's the first QR code there. The Honeybee Health Coalition and beaware.org.au. They've got great information on the pests and diseases. Again, I'm going to link all of these in the description box below. So you can just click those links and you don't have to scan the QR codes if you're on a phone. And then any questions can be directed to me. Here's my email here, tfrisbee@citrusmosquito.org. And if you have any questions related to beekeeping or mosquito control or mosquitoes, I'm happy to answer any questions. And this is the last video in this series. So catch me in another video. Thank you for sticking around if you made it to the end. Again, I'm going to have all of this linked in the description below, and I will see you in the next one.